Hey, for anyone who doesn't know who I am, my name is Michael Manatskanian. I started investing in real estate in May of 2020 is when I bought my first deal, started learning in 2018, and I have actively been growing my portfolio for the last several years to over $22 million of real estate as of like a month ago. I continue to buy real estate. I'm primarily buying the co-living rent by the room strategy. That's the majority of the investments I've done since 2023. And I buy most of my deals leveraging creative financing, subject to seller finance, hybrids, something called Morby methods. I do buy properties the traditional way with DSCR loans. And then I raise money to buy all of my investments. Wealth to Real Estate, absolutely free. We have almost 1,500 members in there. I'm just here to provide value to you guys. And I do so through providing a bunch of free courses, tools, resources, all of that good stuff for you. The community is where people can communicate with each other, ask questions, whatever. If you have questions for these Q&As, especially if you want like me to analyze them and with numbers, you can post, select, and then go the Q&A route. I can help you analyze those deals, but I need all the information to do so. Otherwise, I can just analyze a random deal and hopefully pick up from that experience. In here, I have a couple of free courses for you guys. I'm going to be revamping the courses and kind of changing it up, but it's going to start with Financial Freedom Blueprint. Essentially, how do you actually build wealth and become financially free through real estate? I think so many people say, I want to buy real estate. I want to do real estate. I want to become wealthy. I want whatever, financial freedom, but they don't actually know what that means. So what I do is then I go in detail and break down exactly what that means, what my journey has looked like, and give you tools and resources for you to do your own budget, right? Get your budget in order, understand, are you saving money? Are you spending more money than you make every month? And then understanding the actual path to financial freedom through your various investing efforts. And then deal analysis is a big one. I buy, like I said, properties leveraging traditional financing and creative financing. I think a thing that most people struggle with is actually doing the analysis itself. They just don't know how to determine what is a good deal and what is not a good deal. The most important thing you can do is do your best to only buy great deals. If you are wasting time, money, and energy to buy investments that are not generating you returns that make them worthwhile, or they're losing you money every month, it's like, why are you doing it all in the first place? Why are you buying investments that are not pushing you towards your investing goals, or actually taking you away from them? So there's a bunch of free courses and tools in here for that. Same here. So for like the creative financing, explaining the different creative financing options and how to analyze each of those different deals. All of this training is also about to get revamped in the very near future. Like I said, the Financial Freedom Blueprint, bird dogging. So if you're not ready yet, you're like not in a position yet where you can effectively or feel comfortable buying and holding real estate yourself and owning and operating them, or you don't have the funding for them, or you don't know how to raise capital, whatever, what you can do is bird dogging. It's like the step right before buying your deals is finding great investments for people that are actually buying those investments. So you find someone who is doing the thing that you want to do, you work with them to bring them deals, and you get paid for it. And when you decide you want to be the buyer, you've already got those skill sets. All you do now is just actually buy those deals. So I've got a whole training series in here explaining my buy box, where I like to buy properties. Since I'm primarily buying co-living in pad split markets, I make it real easy. I leverage what's there through pad split, give you access to getting this information. And then co-living. So there's a bunch of co-living deal analysis. So you guys ask me, well, here it is. There's a ton of stuff on co-living. Go grab this stuff. It's all free. And then if you go into most of these links, give you access to a free creative finance real estate investing calculator. But it's not just creative. It does traditional deals. It does cash deals. You can analyze co-living, short-term rentals, mid-term rentals, long-term rentals. You can grab a free copy. If you're someone who just says, you know what, I just want to get solid returns on my money without actually being the one to own and operate and find these deals, great. If you got money, let's just partner on deals. That's even better. You get either solid returns on your money backed by real estate, or you get fractional ownership. We own these assets together. As long as we're the right fit for each other, you invest, you get benefits, I get benefits. It's awesome. All right, so with that, let's get cracking. We're going to do Kevin's deal. So he said it's an on-market deal. So I'm going to go on Zillow, and I pulled up the property that he's looking at. Right, we're going to look at this property. It's a on-market. I think he's proposing a cash deal, right? So we'll see what it looks like with a 25% DSCR loan, or debt service coverage ratio loan. If time allows, I can see, do they have equity? Do they not? Should we maybe try to position this creatively? But more importantly, I'm going to show you where you can get the data so that you can see if this is a good co-living investment in the first place. So is a good market? There are a lot of co-living rentals. Are most of them occupied, or are there a ton of vacancies? How much does each room rent for on average when it's got a shared bathroom or a private bathroom? How many bedrooms can we add here? So it's already a 4-bed, 3-bath, 2152 square feet. So that's solid. Let me just go to the maps real fast. I want to see where this is located. And I'll just show you why I tell everyone to get on Pad Split. It's absolutely free. Get on Pad Split. So we're going to look at this property real fast and see where it's at. It's not Atlanta, right? It's a secondary market potentially. It's even further out than Decatur. Just to quickly see how far is it from downtown Atlanta, 19 miles, 34 minutes. And if you've ever been to Atlanta, I see some people in here who used to live in Atlanta. They know all about how tough it is to make this commute. But I do own properties near College Park. We own some here. We own some here. So we own them all around, as well as further out as well in Atlanta. So understand people are still willing to drive 30 plus minutes, 20 plus miles because they're able to save a good amount of money. But how do you know if this is a great market? The first thing you're going to do, right? This is why you go to the Wealth Through Real Estate School community. If you don't, you can get free access to this community with all these courses. I literally give away for free what people charge thousands and thousands of dollars for because I want to help you guys win on your investing journey. All right, so with that, we're looking at the analysis. We will go, someone asked, co-living versus midterm rentals. Why co-living? I will tell you that co-living and midterm rentals are very similar in the sense that you're providing a furnished rental for several months at a time, if not longer, right? That's really what midterm is and what co-living is. However, midterm is doing that with one tenant in the house, where co-living is doing that with multiple tenants in the same house. I've made the case a million times as to why co-living is better. You can watch that here, right? You can watch why I like co-living, why it's the best rental strategy. I've got all that stuff for you. However, simply put, co-living properties tend to be bigger properties in better locations, and those properties tend to appreciate much more. They go up in value more. They're worth more, so they have more tax benefits and they have more debt pay down, so they're adding more wealth, but also they tend to cash flow significantly more than a midterm rental will. Midterm rentals, the best ones are like 1 to 2 bedrooms, and they don't work necessarily everywhere, whereas co-living does work in a lot of core markets that tend to appreciate more in value. They cash flow more. And even though you have to put more money into your co-living rentals, typically than you would a midterm rental, because you're going to renovate, right? Like Kevin's deal, it's a 4-bed, 3-bath. Well, we're going to want to make that closer to 7, 8 beds if possible. And so it's going to cost money to renovate that property. And then you're going to furnish a bigger house. So it's going to cost more money to get into it. Your cash flow increases so much more than it would than the cash flow as a midterm rental, that the extra money you put into the deal is fully justified. I guess I don't know how to overly simplify it, but you have cash flow, the amount of profit that you make on a property, right? That's great. How much profit are you making on a property? Income minus expenses and reserves. What is left over? That's a big number. But an even more important number is your cash on cash return. What is that cash flow per month times 12? So your annual cash flow divided by the money you put in to get into the deal. That is your cash on cash return. That tells you how good of an investment is this. And that allows you to compare property to property, investment to investment much more easily. So even though you put more money into the deal, you're generating so much more cash flow that your cash on cash return is higher. It tends to be a much better investment than a midterm rental, specifically in regards to cash on cash return, but also because you're buying bigger properties in better locations, like better areas that you're investing in and the better markets that you're investing in. Those properties then are worth more and have more wealth benefits as well. As I mentioned, tax benefits, appreciation, debt pay down. That's why, right? You get better cash flow and cash on cash return, and you get better wealth benefits. That's why I make that case for co-living versus midterm. And when you have one midterm rental fully vacant, you make $0, right? When it's rented, you make whatever, but when it's vacant, you make no money. When it's a rent by the room property, you might not have 100% occupancy. Not every room might be rented, but it's rare that the whole house is empty. So at least you're making some money as opposed to no money at all while you're in those phases of finding another tenant, right? That's another thing there. And a lot of midterm tenants are very open to the rent by the room option because they get to save substantially more. And those that are typically looking for midterm rentals, traveling healthcare employers, military, whoever, they are out and working a lot of the times, or they're in a new area and they want to explore that area. So if they can save money in living in a shared space, they'd prefer that route. Not everyone, but there's a lot of people that prefer that route so that they can then save more of their money and invest it or go and eat out with it, go travel with it, whatever they really want to do. All right, so let's get into Kevin's deal. Go to the bird dogging and I have tons of stuff in here for you. So if you don't have a PadSplit account, it's absolutely free to sign up as a host on PadSplit. The only time you pay PadSplit is when you are managing a property leveraging their platform. But to get all their data and all that stuff, it's absolutely for free. So I have an account. So I'm going to click it. So this is access the host tools. When I click it, it takes me to this page. This is the map of where is PadSplit operating. Blue are their core markets, right? These are established markets, and gray are emerging markets, markets that are going to start having investments in them soon, or people have listings, but they're not fully operational yet. This is insane to me because when I started doing co-living in 2023, there was a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of these markets. To see how much co-living, especially the PadSplit platform, has scaled and grown, it's remarkable. They're just all over, and it's becoming more and more common in tons of core markets. And it's not just the investment strategy working in these markets, but it's also a lot of states are passing legislation to make the rent by the room model actually more easily. The same time that short-term rentals are getting harder and harder to do, at the same time, the co-living properties tend to do better and better, and legislation is encouraging it more so. You've seen this in Colorado. You've seen this in Oregon, Washington, Hawaii's made it a little bit easier. Montana's made it easier. California has added more additional dwelling units. Like you can build another unit on properties to make affordable housing more easy. And most of these areas, like you'll see these core markets, they're in like major cities. It's not like a long-term rental. We have to go in this Conway, Arkansas to make a long-term rental work. We're talking about major cities. So then they tend to have better properties that appreciate more. And the bigger the market, not only do you get the wealth benefits, but the easier it is to own and manage your asset, right? Because there's more service providers, there's more handymen, more contractors, more cleaners, more property managers, more of all these other resources to make your life easier. As someone who owns properties in Alaska, where I started in Fairbanks, Alaska, well, I'm very limited in my property management options, my cleaner options, all that. So I'm very passionate about operating in markets that are not so small that it's just so hard to manage, right? Like it's so hard to manage because less resources there. All right, so now let's go to this property. All right, so 30088. So you can see they'll give you, when you click Atlanta, it'll give you all of the data for that core market. So for example, Atlanta, Georgia, everything they have listed here, there are currently 7,485 units, right? Rooms available for rent on the PadSplit platform. They have 273 upcoming. So there's 273 more that are in progress of being listed on their platform. More importantly, or just as importantly, the demand. How many people have been searching for rent by the room in this market? You want to make sure that the demand is substantially higher than the number of available units and upcoming units. If you have way more units available than people are searching, well, that's not a good sign. That market might be saturated. I've heard for years Atlanta is saturated. It's not even the case. The data doesn't show that. And our ability to rent out properties in Atlanta also doesn't show that. You can also see in Atlanta, right, in all of Atlanta, the average weekly room price for a shared bathroom is $176. So Michael, where do you get this info? Here. Why do I recommend people invest in PadSplit markets, especially those with good data? This is why, because you can actually see this information where it's much harder. I can go on Zillow, I can go on apartments.com, I can go on all these different things to grab some data piece by piece, but this platform is specifically designed for the rent by the room strategy. 265 on average for private bathrooms. Average occupancy, so how many of the rooms that are available are rented? 87%. It takes 8 days typically for the first booking and 33 days to 80% occupancy, right? So if you have 5 rooms, it'll take 33 days on average to fill up 4 of those 5 rooms, right? 80%. One thing I will say is these are averages. I will say most of my properties tend to do much better than this because what the average is the middle, right? My goal is not to be average, definitely not below average. My goal is to be above average. I'm not saying I want to be the best or perfect when it comes to this stuff. It's almost diminishing returns. You can put in all this extra effort, time, and energy to try to be the absolute best, but it's not necessary. All you got to do is be above average. And how do you be above average with your co-living properties? Well, make sure that rooms are not too tiny. Add amenities that are at least at market standard or above. Make sure they have some great photos. That's like the biggest one. People have some terrible photos. They don't highlight the room or the common areas. Lots of things between amenities, photos, your listing, how effective you communicate, how clean you leave your properties, and the reviews you have. all of that makes you substantially better than you would than the average, right? So this is the average, beat the average. How often do you come up with non-paying tenants? Does passive have a path? Okay, so this is a whole other question, and we'll deal with this in the future because it's going to derail from this. But I definitely have had non-paying tenants. It's a huge pain in the butt. PadSplit has a specific way to handle it, right? And then if it doesn't work, you want to get them out and they're not paying, you can do cash for keys. You can give them money to move out. If you want to, you can evict them. It's the normal way if you'd have to remove a tenant in the first place. PadSplit can provide you some guidance, but it's not their thing to like move out tenants. However, if they're non-paying, they will lose their ability to use PadSplit, which encourages people to be a good tenant, right? Be a good member on their platform so that they have the ability to continue renting through that platform. So you go the normal route to evict people if you have to, but there's also some checks and balances, some additional incentive for them to be good stewards, good members on the platform so they can continue using that platform. Otherwise, they won't be able to in the future. All right, let's get to our freaking property. 30088. So I showed you the Atlanta, right? But the best part is you see all these blinds? These are different zip codes and each of them have their own data. So this is where we are operating. And currently there's 163 active units. That's good. I see some that have like, 34 is kind of low, 17 is pretty low, 7's really low. And you'll tend to see the further away you get from the city, the less you tend to have. Or just sometimes there's just certain pockets that have not, like if these could be like really nice areas, so co-living doesn't make sense or whatever. I don't know specifically, but typically you can assume that the further away you are from the core features of a city, whether it's like the major employment centers, the downtown, the fun stuff, whatever, the lower the rent will be is what you can assume. The harder it will be to book those, and you'll tend to have less units available because of those factors. So if we go back to this 3088, where this property is, it is telling us 163 active per week with shared bathroom is 177 average, 244 with private bathroom. Average occupancy is higher, 6 days to first booking, 59 days to 80% booking. I don't know if you remember what we saw in the Atlanta, but from my recollection, the average occupancy is higher here in this market. Could be because the prices are lower or people here have a higher demand for it than elsewhere. Could be just because there's less active units, and as you have more units, that number will drop down. Variety of reasons for that. The 6 days to first booking, I believe that is in line with what we saw for overall Atlanta, but 59 days to 80%. So it's slower, right? It was 33 days in the other one. It's slower to book up the majority of your house, even though the first booking tends to be faster and the average occupancy is higher, right? Just some key things to note. That's why you can't just use the Atlanta data, right? And just say, oh, that's it. Yeah, that's a good starting place to determine what market you should operate in. When I'm comparing Atlanta to Gainesville, and there's very little data here, right? When there's less data, this stuff starts becoming a little bit more irrelevant because there's a very small sample size, very small properties, like few properties available. Well, this data can easily be skewed, right? And all I have to say is the less active units you have, the higher the risk that this information is inaccurate. I'm not saying it's 100% inaccurate, but it could be skewed. It could be pulled in one direction or another more easily because there's just less data. But if you're looking at Atlanta and it's got this data, and you're looking at Charlotte and it's got this data, and you're just trying to choose a major market and you got Jacksonville, that's where it's really great to look at the city to choose the market you want to operate in. I do a whole training for that in my super investors community. It's more of an advanced community for real estate investors who are serious about scaling to financial freedom, creative finance, capital raising, co-living, and like getting really, really, all the systems, blueprint, all that stuff in there. That's what that's for, where we get really in the weeds with that kind of stuff. But this is a good way to just quickly look and see what markets make sense. But then you got to go to the zip code to get the data for your property. There's a whole other step on top of that where once you're on the PadSplit platform, you have a representative. You can reach out to that representative and get like street by street, property by property data. So you're looking at all of Atlanta. Well, you can't use that just for this one market, but it gives you a good idea of this market. Then you go into the zip code, right, that you're operating, get some more data. And then you get even more data that's more specific through your representative at PadSplit, right? So you're just narrowing down and getting more and more accurate with your data. You don't want to take unnecessary risks in investing if you don't have to. This is one of those things you can control. Sometimes there's a little bit of a gamble, right? This is investing. There's risks associated with it where you're taking chances and assuming that things will work similar to the way they have before, and anything can happen, right? That may not be the case. Sometimes you'll get less rent, or it takes longer, or your renovations took more. You can't fully control that, but you try to minimize the risk by getting as good data as possible where possible it's helpful. All right, so with that being said, let me pull up my deal analysis tracker so we can actually analyze this deal. This is the real estate investment calculator, right? This calculator, there's a free version completely available for you. It's in the Wealth to Real Estate School community. But what this allows you to do is analyze investments, the free and paid version. I've put pretty much most of the features in the free version as well. The one caveat is there's a lot more capital raising benefits to the paid one and like other cool features, but you don't really need that if you're just starting out and just want to practice your skills. So if you're more serious and ready to start buying deals and raising money for those deals, where that's more beneficial. You can quickly determine, okay, I want to analyze this deal. It's a hybrid creative deal or subject to or seller finance, or it's a traditional loan, which is what we're going to be using, or it's a cash deal, right? You can analyze all different ways, cash, conventional, and creative all through here. So this is going to be a traditional deal. So we're going to go on Zillow and we're just going to get some key information, right? $250,000 purchase price, $250,000. We're going to assume because it's a DSCR loan, the down payment is more than likely 25%. We'll assume a 25% down payment. It depends on if you're using a DSCR loan, a debt service coverage ratio loan for co-living, or just as a traditional long-term rental. There's way more factors involved in that. You have to account for the after repair value to see the amount you're able, like what the value of the property is to see the loan amount you can get. It's gonna be based on an appraisal. You're gonna have to ensure that it meets the DSCR, stands for debt service coverage ratio, which is basically comparing the rental income divided by debt payments. And if that's over 1, most lenders will provide you a loan, right? As long as the rental income exceeds the monthly debt payments, they will give you this loan product. But there's like some of them will do it for long-term rental income only. Some of them will do it for co-living, right? There's a lot less, but they'll do it for co-living rental income. If you tend to do a co-living DSCR loan, you will probably have to pay a higher down payment, probably have to pay higher interest rates. We're going to skip a lot of that for now. We're just going to go through the actual analysis. You have to talk to your lenders if you're going traditional to see what's available. All right, so down payment $62,500 for a $250,000 house, right? 25% down. So the loan will be $187,500. Right now, on average, DSCR loans are going to be around 7.5, 7 to 8%, right? Depending on your down payment and other factors. But we're going to go with 7.5% right now. And so your loan payment will be $1,311.03. Okay. The first payment, this one doesn't necessarily matter as much, but the first payment is, we'll say 9/1, start of next month, or start up because we're at the end of July. So it'll probably be a whole month after closing. All right. Taxes and insurance. We can quickly just estimate a few things right now. And let's go to the pricing of the property. Usually the pricing section will also show you the taxes. So it was recently assessed at $94,920. That's not right. So something has happened and that's not right. What we can do is we're going to use a little cheat code on the calculator. It's a little tool that will called Smart Asset that will quickly help you estimate the property taxes. I'm not saying this is 100% accurate. Please do not believe that. I'm saying this is a good way to quickly estimate because what's in there is not accurate. So this is Stone Mountain, Georgia. Property's value, we said is $250,000. Annually, $23.73. Okay. Do not use that as your sole. Like you can look up county records. You could see what their millage rate is. That's kind of doing that, but like, please do some more due diligence than that. For the sake of this analysis, we don't have time to go through every little nuance that way. So insurance that you see here under this fixed expenses is insurance for the property. $80 to $100 for a long-term rental is a pretty good estimate. And then when you go to the co-living section to analyze, you're going to add an additional insurance cost because it always costs more to own a property that you're renting out compared to living in. Then it costs even more if you're renting it out by the room or short-term rental or whatever than as just a regular insurance policy. Once again, we can do a quick estimate by looking at V-Home insurance. So it's also linked in there. You're going to go to by location. This is going to take the whole area, but Georgia, and it says properties between $200 to $29.99 is $1,071. So that estimate of $100 a month or $1,200, it's a pretty good estimate for right now. I'd rather be a little bit over than under. We've made mistakes sometimes, right? When you don't account for that, then you end up paying more for insurance and that affects your cash flow. It's better to slightly overestimate than underestimate and then lose the cash flow that you thought you were going to have. But mistakes happen. That's just what happens. So $1,200 is a good estimate right there. If you're buying it, the DSCR loan, there's no property mortgage insurance. There's should be no HOA if they're looking at this property. You can quickly look at that on Zillow by, I believe you go here, show more, HOA, has HOA, no, right? So right there, no HOA. Good, because I don't want to do rent by the room or any advanced strategy in an HOA community. I don't mind long-term rentals sometimes, and I'm not even buying long-term rentals right now. It's not worth it for me financially. The time and effort is not worth $200 of cash flow if you can get that. But when there's short-term, midterm rent by the room, well, HOAs, they can make it very annoying for you. All right, so we've got the basics of the deal, right? We know the purchase price, the down payment, the DSCR loan, the monthly payments on that, the taxes and insurance. So it's $1,609 between DSCR loan, taxes, and insurance, what you're going to pay for this property. Those are your fixed expenses. Then you have your entry costs. So your entry costs are everything that's going to cost you to get into this investment, right? To acquire it and close on it. Then the cost to renovate it and furnish it, and the carrying costs that you have. So while you're renovating and furnishing, you still have the mortgage payments and utility costs you have to account for. And on top of that, you also want a little bit of reserve, some cushion. And that's where your entry cost kind of breaks down into much more detail. So we're going to do that. Then we're going to go all into the co-living piece because there's additional entry costs, there's additional expenses, and we haven't even touched the income piece. All right, so let's zoom in a little bit. So your down payment to seller, right? The down payment for this is pulled from here. Agent commissions. So you can go on Zillow. Okay. So your fixed expenses, right? HOA and all that stuff right here. And then it's your entry cost, right? So your down payment is pulled into here. Then you're going to have agent commissions. I'll show you how to grab to see what that is on Zillow. Closing costs for the property. This admin / reimbursement cost. This is like if you have a transaction coordinator, if you're forming an LLC, if you're doing an inspection. Some people lump that in with their closing costs, which makes sense because you pay at closing or like it's accounted for in the closing. However, at least for the way I operate, and I think the majority, if you're doing like a creatively financed TC and all that, you pay them up front, or at least you pay them a deposit up front. You pay to form your LLC early on. You pay to inspect the property before the closing date. And I'm the one funding those. But then at the closing date, I'm getting reimbursed that from my capital partner, right? I'm getting my money back that I put in for this, right? That's how it should happen because they're funding the deal. Any rehab or furnishing costs, think of this. It's just like, what is the general renovations you have to do? Don't think of it for the co-living, renovations and things like that. Just general renovations, cleaning, just some basic stuff there. If you're getting a deal from a wholesaler, the assignment fee. If you are getting paid an acquisition fee to buy this deal, then you would account for it here, and then your reserves here. We're going to set this to 0. I don't think there's a wholesaler involved with this deal. Okay, so let's look at the agent real fast and see what the agent stuff is here. So you can go on Zillow, kind of that same section I put before. Oh, see right here, annual tax amount, $41.56. That's good. So this is a more accurate amount, $41.56 annual tax amount. So actually, let's go update that. This way, you can't just trust the property taxes provided by Smart Asset, just a rule of thumb, $41.56. Just go and update that here. That's a substantial difference, right? It's an extra $100, almost $200, $150 right there. All right, back to Zillow. And let's see if it says anything about the agent commission here. It doesn't say. So things have changed recently, and like the way agents are paid. Does the buyer pay it? Does the seller pay it out of their, the income they have? Things have changed, and there's a lot more flexibility on who can pay and how much you pay and all that stuff. But a general rule of thumb is it's 5% agent commissions, 2.5% for the buyer agent, 2.5% for the seller's agent. If you tend to buy creatively financed, the agent commission will be paid by the buyer, or you can negotiate that. You can like negotiate who pays what. I mean, it's really negotiable, but if you're buying a property subject to and the seller doesn't have a lot of equity and they're not going to get paid a lot, they can't afford to pay that. So it really depends on the situation. For a traditional deal, you can assume there's the buyer's agent and the seller's agent, and everyone splits their 50-50, right, agent commission. So, when I operate, I don't really have a buyer's agent. I don't really need a buyer's agent. So I don't use that, and that saves me 2.5%. However, sometimes as incentive, I will pay the seller's agent commission, or they'll pay their commission. It just really depends on the structure of the deal and how much they're making on it and what makes sense for them. But in this instance, we'll just say it's a 50-50 split. 5%. So once again, you're focused on your payment, which is the 2.5%. Closing costs, 2% is a decent amount to estimate. That's typically for like a conventional loan. We're also accounting for these other costs that will be incorporated in there as well. So it's over 2%, right? For the inspection, your LLC, right? That's not part of your closing costs, but if you're going to put it in an LLC, you have to do that. It's part of your due diligence. If you're paying for a separate transaction coordinator, right? Not one from the agent. Like if I'm not using an agent, I still have a transaction coordinator doing a lot of the paperwork and all that stuff. That's here. When you have a DSCR loan, you tend to have more closing costs, a little bit more closing costs. Maybe we'll just put 2.5% to be a little bit overestimate on that scenario. Otherwise, let's just leave the entry cost. So just to get into this deal, it's $87,073. The majority of that is going as a down payment to the seller. There's also money for reserves and that kind of stuff as well. So focus on the co-living aspect itself. Let's see how many rooms could be added here. So Kevin mentioned that he believes you can add 3 more rooms. Well, let's see what we have here. We got the property. It looks like there's solid parking. You can also look up the parking by going on get a much better by going the street view route. It's good to see like, okay, where is the parking? You don't want to park on your neighbors, but this is perfect because it's a corner, right? Is what it looks like. So, and there's all this parking and here, great. That's one of the biggest factors for a good co-living and preventing kind of issues with tenants is making sure there's sufficient parking and minimizing your neighbors complaining is making sure your tenants are parking in their spot. People could also park all along this line and then pull out from here. There's the garage, which might or might not be converted. We'll see. But parking's not an issue here, which is great. Yeah, so you can see it's a corner unit right here. Excellent. All right, so let's look at the property. If they have a floor plan, usually it's at the very end. Those are the most helpful. Oh, look at that. We have a floor plan. So you don't even need to overly look at all the other stuff, especially because they have square footage. So this is yeah, okay, so floor 1, 2, and 3, right? I think the garage is here. It's not included, right? But they have this huge family room that you walk into. This is easily 1 or 2 bedrooms because you want your bedrooms for co-living to be at least 10 by 10, right? The smallest you can do is 10 by 8, but that's 80 square feet. It's really tiny. If you want to keep tenants long-term, 10 by 10 is the minimum you want. 10 by 12 is even better, right? It's an even better square footage. So because this is 23 by 11, that's great because you can have 11 by 10 and 11 by 12, whatever, and you're going to lose some because of walls and all that stuff. You do see this window right here, and each room should have its own window. So that'll have to go here. This one could be maybe a smaller room, right? And then you keep this hallway here. There's a door here to this room. This one's a little bit of a smaller room, but it goes here. There's this staircase. Okay, so this is the second floor. Great. So you can enter through here. You don't have to enter through down here. Looks like there's an option to enter through there, but you don't have to, I believe. This is a hallway, not entrance. So actually, when you come in here, it's great. So you can make this a room. You can make this a room. This is potentially 2 rooms, and there's a shared bathroom downstairs, right? That's not already accounted for. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the tracker and go in my comments. So family room equals 2 rooms. Family room, first floor, right? Just keep track of your notes. Makes it a little bit easier. All right, let's look at the next one. This is floor 3. So floor 2, you enter this way. There's the breakfast nook and the kitchen. Okay, I would leave this all here. Kitchen and breakfast nook. I mean, let's see how big it is, but I would not mess with that. Some people try to make rooms out of things that are illogical. You definitely don't want rooms like completely just so immersed in the kitchen. Make sure there's solid space for that because that's going to be an area where people hang out a lot. Or at least that's like the common area for them to hang out primarily. So what is this? Oh, this is the living room that we saw. All right, so we're going to see the floor plans here, and then we're going to look at the actual rooms to make sense of it. It's got to look logical too. Like it's got to make sense. So let's try to piece together what we're looking at here. So you walk it through here, the foyer. Then you're going to have this breakfast nook and the kitchen right there, right? This area. There's a staircase up and down. Great. So this is another reason why you want to keep this open because this is going to take you to the 3rd floor. I believe this will take you downstairs. Either way, one of these is right. Either way, you want to make sure there's access to both of these. So this is to the right of so here's the kitchen. It's a little weird because this dining room looks like a square, but it looks in this photo like a rectangle. Maybe it's just small and that's why, but this is obviously a bedroom. The dining room is a bedroom. All you got to do is you're going to want to potentially better insulate these walls. You can put another layer of wall there. You can redo this. You can open up the drywall and put in better noise canceling insulation. You want to do something because right next to the kitchen, you want to make sure that this tenant it's convenient for them. So back to the notes. I'm going to put dining room equals 1 room. This living room is huge, 20 by 11. This could be another 2 rooms. You just have to make sure that there's sufficient access and your windows, right? Once again, you want a window in every room. You'd have to move this window 20 by 11. You can have like 2 roughly 10 by 11 rooms, but you're going to have to make sure there's a way to access them, which would be tough, right? You could just make this one huge room, a much better huge room, like a huge master room, and then the dining room as its own smaller room. You could try to make this 3. I would say living room equals 1 huge room for now. That'll be way less cost too, to put a door here, put a door here, way convenient. And this will be a really good room that people will stay in for a very long time. And you don't have to worry about renovating this. Sometimes it's not about maximizing the number of rooms, but also thinking about like convenience and what makes logical sense too. And then upstairs we have bedroom, 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 primary bedroom. Let's look at the photos again. But so yeah, kitchen's solid. It's a solid kitchen. Yeah, you'd close this off. Like I said, you'd want to insulate this for sure, this wall, because it's literally like right up against there. You have this extra little nook. And this is cool because you can change this for its own entryway too and make this even more valuable for that tenant. I mean, it's not that big of a deal to come from here and here. You can also give them their own entryway. All right, so you go upstairs, you have the bathrooms. It's not like this property needs to get renovated, it needs to get updated, but for something like this, you're not renting this thing out as like a luxury short-term rental or even a luxury rent by the room. It's not like you're like in downtown Atlanta, you're in a secondary market. So you don't need to overdo the renovations. It's not going to make a substantial difference. You don't need to like take this out and put marble tiles and all that. It'd be a waste of money for a rent by the room in this area in particular. All right, so there's just outdoor space not accounted for as square footage. That's good. So the biggest concern here are the bathrooms. So in theory, this family room has 2 rooms, both share 1 bath. This is wrong too. What were these stats? On Zillow, these stats were 4 bed. Oh, actually, we were right. 4 bed, 3 bath. Both share 1 bath. I'm not sure what the situation is with 2 bathrooms here. It's like kind of illogical. 1, none here, which is very weird. Oh, because there's 2 upstairs. 1 here and then 2 upstairs is why. So this one could be a private bath just for this primary room, but then you're gonna have 1, 2, 3 sharing this one, 4, 5 people sharing this 1 bathroom. That'll be tough. You could allow people access to this one as well, right? Or you can make all 3 of these accessible to people. I would probably just say the guys here share down here. These 3 share this one. This one has its own private. That's kind of the route I would go. So with that being said, click Alt Enter. You'll say floor 1 and 2, 4 beds share 1 bath. Floor 3 shares 1 bath. 3. Oops, floor 3. 3 rooms share 1 bath, and floor 3 private room 1 bath. So when you see really, really high incomes on pad split, the highest end, that's what we're talking about, is like that upper unit private bathroom. That's what we're talking about there. If you want to get more granular data, you just go on pad split's platform as a renter and you just find a room and you could just see what else is there. What are the amenities? What are people charging, right? And you want to get closer and closer to where you're actually at. See what the house looks like. What are they renting for? How many rooms are available? Are they private? Are they shared? All that kind of stuff. So there's this one, there's 2 rooms left, like whatever. I'm not going to go through that right now, but you can look up that more granular data right there. So we have 4 bedrooms and we said we're going to add 2 rooms downstairs, 2 rooms to the main floor. So we're adding 4. So total adding 4 rooms. And we're going to say 7 share 2 bath, 1 has private bath. Okay. That's going to be really important. So you're going to add 4 more rooms. On average, this is kind of where we're at, roughly $7,500 per room conversion. And that accounts for a couple of things, right? Like if you're adding these rooms and you're in a certain area that requires air conditioning, you should add air conditioning in there, which means you might have to either A, increase the current capabilities of the AC, or B, put like split units or individual units for those. You can go the window units, but for me, we prefer the little split AC units if we can in those rooms. And then if you have to move the window over, that costs more money, right? Like there's things that cost more money. Some of these renovations where it's like on the cheapest end is this one, right? Closing this off, or like you'd have to add a door here. So looking at this again, you could make this a doorway entry. You still need a window because you have to be able to access this. So you'd make this a door. They'd have to walk through the kitchen. It kind of sucks, but it is what it is because you don't want them walking through here and you don't want to make a whole hallway here. So you'd give them this entry, right? Turn this into a door. We saw it as an open space, very easy to do. Close this wall off. This one, turn this into a door. These are very cheap. These are going to be much less than $7,500. But then we're talking about this family room, we're going to have to move windows, add an extra hallway here. This one's nice because you're just putting one wall, window, right? Window, but then it's wall, right? And then the doors for those, that you could assume that will cost the $7,500 or more. All these are rules of thumb to see if it makes sense before you move forward with getting a contractor out there and all that stuff. Because you can at least analyze it with some semi-realistic numbers, understanding that every market is different. The level of repairs you got to do is different. So you got to get really comfortable and confident in the markets that you're operating in. That's a big part of it. All right. Furnishing costs. So we estimate $1,500 per bedroom costs typically less than $1,200, if not $1,000 per room. But the extra money goes towards furnishing the common areas. So that kitchen, the little nook, any other common area spaces, that's where that extra money is going to go to. And it's fine to have a little bit of reserves here. So $30,000 of additional entry, right, for renovations, $12,000 for furnishing costs. So now this property is going to cost you $129,073 to get into it, right? To get into it, to renovate it, to furnish it, and then to have some reserves set aside, which your monthly carrying costs are your fixed expenses. And because I have already pre-selected down here, CoLiving as your chosen management strategy, it will tell you quite literally, it'll also account for the expenses in addition to the fixed expenses. So let's go into the income piece, right? So we have pad split data. We're just going to go really fast now. So 177 per share, 244 per private. When I say be above average, don't try to be above average when it comes to estimating your room rental income. Understand that you could be above average for this stuff. And if it makes sense on average, it's definitely going to be even better if you're above average for how quickly you can rent it out and all that. So 177, 244. Oops. 244, 177. Okay, so that's your 8 total rooms, right? 7 of them share 1 bath. One of them has its own private bath, master suite. And then now it's your other expenses. So we have your fixed expenses from up above, right? We have all that stuff here, your loan payment, taxes, insurance. But because this is CoLiving, you're going to estimate maybe another $50 to $100 more in insurance than the estimate we saw before. I just put 100. I'd rather be a little off and overestimate than underestimate in this scenario. Utilities, this is going to vary, right? It's going to vary on your location. Like, where is the property? What are the utility companies? You can chat GPT, you can Google, you can talk to other investors in the area. You can talk to other passport owners. You can talk to the homeowner. You can get a pretty good idea in the markets that you're operating in to get a more clear understanding. Just understand you're going to have a lot more people in this house, even if they're working and all that stuff more. There's a lot more people in the house. All your utilities are going to cost more than just a typical long-term rental or a typical single-family home. So like if the person is living there and you're buying their house from them on market, well, whatever they're paying, you're going to pay more than that. Like, that's a good rule of thumb. You're going to pay more than them. Like, that's a good assumption. I mean, other key resources, like you could try to see if PassPlay has the data for you in that area. You could talk to property managers in that area that do the rent by the room. All that can help you. Here's just some estimates in here. So it's $405 between water and sewer, gas and electric, garbage, internet and Wi-Fi. Like, this one tends to plus or minus $25, not a huge deal. But water, sewer, gas, and electric, especially if you're in Florida or Texas or Arizona or California or Atlanta, right, in Georgia, like, all that's going to vary substantially based on the property size, the number of people, and just what do utility rates cost there. Some places are way more freaking expensive. And understand their seasonality too, right? Like, when it's hot and you got AC and utilities included for these guys, well, they're going to tend to spend more for your gas and electric, or your electric primarily, whatever. So understand that. Then there's landscaping costs. If you're offering landscaping, you should, because people argue about landscaping. You just do it. You don't want them to have to do it. But depending on the lot size, that's going to cost more or less, and how frequently you're doing it. Are you offering house cleaning of the common areas? We like to do that at least on a quarterly basis, sometimes monthly, just so that that kitchen area and the bathrooms, except for private bathrooms, but the shared bathrooms and the kitchen areas are being cleaned. So it's just one less issue. Are you sending over supplies like paper towels, toilet paper, sponges, soap, not like bathroom soap, but like kitchen dishwashing soap, dishwasher pods? You do or do not have to do this. It's ultimately up to you and the way you want to manage your property. And then if you're leveraging the pad split platform to manage your property, well, they actually charge 8%, and they don't manage your property. They help you find tenants that can move into your property, right? Like they go and they say, hey, I want to do this. And then, like I want to live in this house. And then what pad split will do is they'll get them connected to you, and you manage all your like income collection on there. You manage guest communication on there, and they charge a fee for that. What they charge is listed here. They charge 100% of the first 10 days someone moves in, and then 8% after that. So really it's 8%, but after the first 10 days of collecting 100%. So the first month, right? If they're there all month, this is the charge. What that kind of averages out to is around 12%, assuming roughly a yearly turnover, right? So if they turn over, if they're moving out and new ones coming in early, like after a few months, well, it's going to cost you more because now you got to pay the next 10 days the new person moves in. If they're staying long term, well, you're only paying that 8% longer term on that tenant. And when they move out, well, then you have to pay that 10%. So roughly it averages out to around 8%, 12%. If you're self-managing, this could be zero. If you are like me and have virtual assistants or people on your team that are then doing the back-end management because it's easier once you have pad split in place, then you do that. What pad split doesn't do is like move in your tenants or, walk them through or coordinate cleanings or handyman and contractors or whatever. You can communicate with your guests on there, but you have to still do that physical element of it. And you can either pay property managers or you can do it yourself and you assign that charge. There's property managers in Atlanta that charge around 8% if it's on pad split. There's some property managers that don't use pad split and you just pay them 15% and nothing here, right? So it depends on the strategy and in the market and who you're talking to and what your plan is for that. It's up to you ultimately. I would ideally never put this to zero unless you're okay with self-managing and never getting paid for it. Like, especially if I'm raising capital, I never put it to zero because I don't want to buy myself a job of managing these properties for no income. I just don't want to be on that hook. I'd rather just outsource that management if I can, ideally. And then vacancy and capital expenditures. So vacancy is how often is your property remaining vacant? Well, we have the occupancy, right? We have that right here. It says 91% occupancy. So that means there's 9% vacancy. Well, that quickly here is now 9%. Maintenance and capital expenditures. The rule of thumb you hear people do is say 10% of your income should be set aside for maintenance and capital expenditures. That's true for long-term rentals that make substantially less income than a co-living rental. For example, this property is going to make $6,426 a month in income. If it was a long-term rental, let's just say $2,400. It's probably less than that, but $2,400 a month, 10% is $245 that you're setting aside for maintenance and capital expenditures. Well, even at 6%, you're setting aside $386. So it's $140 more, almost 50% higher than the long-term rental, even at only 6% of the income. Understand that the maintenance piece is going to be higher. You're going to have more wear and tear. You're going to have more plumbing issues, electrical issues, whatever. People are using your stuff more. There's more wear and tear. However, a lot of capital expenditures, which are really expensive, will not be. A capital expenditure is like you're going to have to replace your roof. Well, having more tenants in the house is not going to result in you having to replace your roof faster. Or major appliances, yeah, there's more wear and tear, but not like it's just getting destroyed within, a fraction of the time it would have otherwise. So have some common sense, and that's kind of what this does. The 6% allows for more maintenance and CapEx than a long-term rental, but it's not like if it's at 10%, you're setting aside $7,000 for maintenance and CapEx. That's like a ridiculously high amount. You won't see that unless you have a really outdated property you didn't renovate and improve. That's not the scenario with this property. All right, so with all that being said, $6,426 of income, $2,557 for expenses, $1,092 for management, $964 for reserves. So this property income minus all of this is $1,813 of cash flow. This property, assuming these entry costs, the $129,000 is accurate, right? Your original plus the co-living entry costs, that leaves you at a 16.9% cash on cash return. For me, by all metrics, this makes a lot of sense. I buy properties that are co-living that generate at least $1,000 a month of cash flow and have 15% or higher cash on cash return. Some people buy at 8% or 10% cash on cash return. Some people buy at $500 a month cash on cash return. You can change these goals. When you analyze the deal, it'll very quickly tell you deal or no deal based on what you have as your goal and what is presented here. Okay. Another thing to understand is if you have no reserves, 100% occupancy, no maintenance or capex issues, which will never happen. That's the perfect best case scenario. Your actual returns would have been 2776 with a 25.8% cash on cash return. Why do I include that? Because this is more of your realistic scenario, and this is the perfect scenario. Understanding that you'll somewhere be between these numbers typically, as long as your analysis is correct. So you just kind of know what the upside looks like at the highest end for this property, right? So that's why I have that included here as well. But don't make your investment decisions based off that. So understand that is it in a perfect scenario. That's what you can get to, which is not realistic. You will have things to do. Just understand that's the perfect scenario is what it would look like. With this calculator, depending on if you've analyzed it like long-term, mid-term, short-term, right, with their own income expenses, with their own, so you could do the long-term analysis. You could do like to see, okay, well, if I leave it as a long-term rental, it makes this much and I have way less expenses because the tenant covers theirs, way less entry costs. Does long-term potentially make more sense? Or if I'm doing mid-term or short-term, you can compare that stuff. If you fill it out immediately, this will tell you what is the highest and best use strategy? Which of these scenarios that you've ran has the highest cash on cash return? And then you just select which one do you want the full analysis to be on. This will do this long-term analysis. And if you're like me and you raise money for your deals and you are either a super investor or have the paid version of the calculator, you can then quickly say, okay, I'm going to go the co-living route. This is what my returns look like for me and a private money. If I'm bringing someone in and we're going 45% split, they bring in the $129,000, they get 45% ownership, 45% cash flow. These are their returns. This is their cash flow. This is their debt pay down benefits. This is their appreciation benefits. This is their interest and depreciation. Those are tax benefits. This is the total tax benefits they get. So for them bringing in $129,000 and getting 45% ownership and cash flow, they get a 7.6% cash on cash return and an 18.8% total return on investment when you account for everything else. That's year 1. Then year 5, year 10, year 20. If you have private money lenders, you decide, hey, you know what? I'm not going to go with private money partner. I want a private money lender. I want to keep all the ownership. Well, at 12%, what does all that look like? Well, you'd be left over with $522 a month in cash flow after paying your private money lender their interest. But understand you're going to have to pay that $129,000 off when the loan is due, right? So you can really quickly analyze and then present, okay, if I have a private money lender, you just screenshot this and include it to show them like why this deal makes sense, why there's enough returns available. Private money partner, you screenshot this and you send it to them and say, hey, based on this deal, here's all the information. Here's your 1, 5, and 10-year returns. It's all snapshotted here. Instead of trying to go through all of this and all of this, the most important information for them is snapshotted in here. Hopefully, all of that, I know we ran through a lot, but hopefully that makes a lot of sense. You're probably gonna have to watch this a few times, and that's okay. That's the goal. You're gonna have to get better over time. Stuff like this is happening all the time in the Wealth to Real Estate community. There's free courses, trainings, all that good stuff for you. If you're starting out in your journey or you're, trying to just get some free value and all that, I provide tons of information for you for free in my Wealth to Real Estate school community. That is in the YouTube description. I have it in my Instagram bio, all that good stuff for you. Or if you're someone who's already doing real estate, you have some cash reserves or you have some capital ready to go, you've got your active income needs met, you want to actually fast track your path to financial freedom, that is my super investors community. You can apply to see if you're a good fit, and then we'll have a conversation to see if you're a good fit. I only want people that join to have a very high, like extremely high probability of succeeding. I don't want anyone paying me for coaching or mentorship if I don't think they're going to succeed. So I just filter it out and say, hey, take advantage of all the free stuff I provide. 90+% of the content I put out there is free, right? It's just more the advanced stuff for super investors. Take advantage of the free stuff if you need it. If you're someone who's looking to scale and fast track your path to financial freedom, you got your, and you're ready to go and ready to invest in yourself, then apply to be a super investor and we can have a discussion and see if that's the right fit for you. With all that, please hang out with me on Instagram and on YouTube, and then, join me in the Wealth to Real Estate School community and get access to free tools, resources, trainings, all that good stuff. Thank you guys. Have a blessed day.